I saw my father's hand hovering over my champagne flute, a soft clink as a pale powder swirled into the bubbles.
He didn't notice me watching.
My stomach churned, not from the drink, but from the years of abuse that led to this moment.
They thought I was helpless. They thought I was still that scared little kid.
But they had no idea that tonight, I was ready for them. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or treated like you didn't matter, this story will light a fire in you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in, because the way this revenge unfolds will stay with you long after the credits roll. The truth is, my story didn't start at that graduation party. It started years before, long before champagne glasses, string lights, and guests clinking forks against plates. On paper, I had the kind of childhood people envy. 2 parents. A suburban house with a freshly painted white fence.
Rose bushes by the front porch.
My father, Richard, owned a small but profitable construction business. My mother, Elaine, was known in our neighborhood for her charity events and perfectly ironed table linens. To outsiders, we were picture perfect. But behind the front door, the air was different.
It was thick. Heavy. Like you could almost taste the tension before you even took off your shoes.
Richard wasn't the kind of father who raised his voice all the time.
He didn't need to. His silences were worse.
Long, deliberate pauses after I said something, followed by a single muttered word. Pathetic.
He had a gift for making me feel small without lifting a finger.
Elaine, on the other hand, believed cruelty was a form of tough love. If you cry every time someone criticizes you, she'd say while picking apart my report card, you'll never survive in the real world. To her, affection was currency, and I was always broke. My older brother, Daniel, was their pride and joy. Everything about him was exceptional. His smile, his grades, his leadership potential. If Daniel scored a B, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I scored an A, it was because the test was too easy. I learned early that love in our house was conditional, and I was never meeting the conditions. By high school, I had stopped trying to impress them. I poured myself into part-time jobs, staying out late under the excuse of work shifts just to avoid being home. I saved every dollar I could. Not for a car, not for clothes, but for my escape. That escape came in the form of a full scholarship to a university 3 hours away. I remember the day I got the acceptance letter. My hands shook as I opened it, the black and white words swimming in front of my eyes. We are pleased to offer you. I looked up, smiling for the first time in weeks.
Elaine's reaction?
Don't expect us to pay for anything. Scholarships run out, and you'll come crawling back. Richard didn't even look up from his newspaper. Just don't embarrass us.
So I went. And for 4 years, I built a life outside their shadow.
But no matter how far away I lived, they never stopped finding ways to remind me what I wasn't. That's why, when graduation rolled around, I didn't expect them to be proud. I didn't even expect them to come. But they insisted, they insisted, on throwing me a party.
And in hindsight,
I should have known it wasn't out of love. The morning of the party, the sky was a pale, cloudless blue, the kind that tricks you into thinking the day will be perfect. When I arrived at my parents' house, it looked exactly as it had when I left for college. Neat rows of hydrangeas along the driveway, lawn trimmed to perfection, a large banner tied between 2 oak trees that read, "Congratulations, graduate."
From a distance, it could have passed for something heartwarming.
Up close, the cracks showed.
The banner had my name spelled wrong.
The decorations looked like they'd been pulled from storage, creased tablecloths, a sagging arch of balloons half deflated before noon. I stepped into the backyard and was immediately met with the clink of glasses and the buzz of polite conversation. Old neighbors were there, a few distant relatives, some of my father's business acquaintances. Hardly any of my friends had been invited. It felt less like my celebration and more like a networking event for them. Elaine swooped in, air-kissing my cheek with a perfume cloud so strong it made my eyes water.
"Darling, you're late. Smile. Will you?
People are watching." Her lipstick barely moved when she spoke, as if she was afraid emotion would ruin her perfect presentation. Richard was across the yard, surrounded by 3 men in suits, gesturing broadly like he was pitching a deal.
He didn't so much as glance my way.
I moved toward the refreshments table, trying to blend in. There were trays of shrimp cocktail, a pyramid of mini quiches, and a bar set up under a white canopy. The bartender, a young guy probably working his first gig, handed me a flute of champagne with a congratulatory smile.
That's when it happened. I turned slightly, just enough to see Richard out of the corner of my eye.
He had stepped up beside me so casually, it was like he'd done it 100 times before.
One hand holding his own drink,
the other slipping a small, folded paper packet from his jacket pocket.
He tilted it just over my glass.
A fine, pale powder slid into the champagne, dissolving instantly with a soft fizz. For a moment, I thought maybe it was sugar, some kind of garnish. But the way he immediately stepped back, scanning the crowd as if to make sure no one noticed, made my stomach drop. My hand tightened on the glass. The bubbles rose and popped against the rim, almost mocking me.
I forced my breathing to stay even.
My pulse, however, betrayed me, pounding in my ears like a warning drum. Elaine appeared beside him, placing a hand on his arm. They shared a look. Not a loving glance, not even a smirk, just something cold.
Calculated.
Then Richard turned to me, smile plastered on his face. "To our brilliant daughter," he said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. The champagne shimmered in the sunlight. Everyone waited for me to drink.
But I didn't.
I raised it halfway to my lips, feigned a polite sip, and let the liquid barely touch my tongue before lowering it again. My smile didn't falter, but inside,
I was already planning.
I didn't know what they had just tried to do, but I knew two things for sure.
1. This wasn't a misunderstanding.
2. I wasn't going to let it slide. The chatter from the backyard faded behind me as I slipped through the sliding glass door into the kitchen. It was quiet here, too quiet compared to the buzz outside. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, low and steady, grounding me in a moment that felt surreal.
I set the champagne flute on the marble counter.
Even under the kitchen lights, it looked deceptively harmless, just golden liquid and bubbles. The kind of thing you'd toast with at any celebration. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying what I'd just seen.
The flash of the paper packet. The quick flick of my father's wrist.
The way Elaine had stepped in like a stage partner hitting her cue. My heartbeat wasn't just fast, it was heavy, each thud echoing in my chest like a fist against a door. My hands were clammy, my mouth dry. But I wasn't afraid in the way I expected. Something else was taking over. 4 years of pushing through their insults, of proving myself without their help, of swallowing my pride just to keep the peace, all of it condensed into one sharp, unshakable thought.
This ends here. 4 years, I had played defense.
I had learned to dodge their verbal blows, to minimize myself so they wouldn't have a reason to come after me.
But now? Now they had crossed into something physical.
Dangerous. And strangely, that made me calmer.
Because now, I had proof.
Proof that they weren't just emotionally abusive, they were something far darker.
I glanced around.
The kitchen island was stacked with serving trays and unopened bottles of wine.
At the far end, my purse sat where I'd dropped it earlier.
I picked up the champagne glass, careful not to touch the rim, and slipped it into a large zippered pouch inside my bag. My fingers brushed the fabric of my phone, and I made a mental note to back up every text and voicemail I'd ever saved from them.
This wasn't just going to be about the champagne.
No, this was going to be about every single time they'd called me a leech. Every time they'd told me I'd never make it without them. Every smug look they'd shared when I failed at something. I took one last deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped back outside. To the guests, I was still the smiling graduate. But inside, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. If there's one thing I learned growing up with Richard and Elaine, it's that you never show your hand too early. They thrived on confrontation, on turning any accusation back around until you were the one apologizing. I'd fallen for it too many times. Not this time. So, for the rest of that graduation party, I played my role flawlessly. I laughed at small talk. I took photos with distant relatives. I pretended to sip my champagne, discreetly tipping small amounts into the grass whenever no one was looking. By the time I left, the glass was still 3/4 full and safely sealed in a zippered pouch inside my bag. That night, back in my apartment, I set it in the back of my fridge, where it sat like a silent witness. I didn't know exactly what was in it, yet, but I knew it could become my most valuable weapon. Within the week, I found a discreet, privately run lab 2 towns over. Cash payment, no questions asked. When I handed over the champagne sample, the technician gave me a curious look. "Just tell me if it's got anything unusual," I said. He nodded slowly. "You'll have results in 2 weeks." In the meantime, I started combing through years' worth of text messages, emails, and old voicemails from my parents. There were plenty,
each one dripping with the same venom they'd always used.
Don't think your degree will make you special. Stop acting like the world owes you something. You'll always come back begging, you're too weak to survive out there.
Hearing them again should have hurt.
Instead, they made me cold, focused. Every insult was another bullet in the chamber. I also knew that beneath their polished image, they were financially strained. I'd overheard hints over the years, late-night arguments about overdue loans and missed payments. That was Daniel's blind spot, too. He believed our parents were untouchable, and they encouraged that belief.
So I started digging.
Public records, property liens, court filings, all the quiet, unglamorous paperwork that can tell you exactly how unstable someone's life really is.
What I found.
They weren't just struggling, they were teetering.
Maxed out credit cards. A home equity loan they hadn't been paying down.
Even whispers of a failed business deal my father was desperately trying to cover up.
2 weeks later, the lab called.
There's definitely a sedative in here, the technician told me, his voice clipped and professional.
High dosage.
Enough to knock someone out cold for hours. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the phone for a long time.
Sedatives. At my graduation party. From my own father's hand. They weren't trying to humiliate me.
They were trying to incapacitate me. And now, I had proof. From that moment, my revenge plan stopped being hypothetical. I wasn't just collecting dirt anymore. I was building a guillotine, and I'd make sure they walked themselves right under it. Once I knew what was in that champagne, the rest of my plan became crystal clear. I wouldn't confront them in private. That would be wasted. No, this needed to happen in the one place they cared about most, the court of public opinion.
Richard and Elaine's image was their oxygen.
The charity events, the holiday cards with perfect family photos, the social brunches at the country club, it was all an elaborate PR campaign. Take that away, and they'd suffocate. I didn't have to wait long for the perfect opportunity. Every year, they hosted a New Year's Eve gala, black tie, champagne fountains, string quartets, the whole works. It was their crowning jewel of the social calendar, a night when every local business owner and small-town VIP gathered to toast the new year and to admire my parents. If I was going to take them down, it had to be there, in front of all the people whose approval they worshipped. Evidence alone wouldn't be enough, not for people conditioned to see my parents as flawless.
I needed to make them feel what I felt.
So I started preparing a presentation, not slides, not a PowerPoint, but a carefully crafted story. The kind that would start soft, pull people in, and then hit with a gut punch they couldn't forget. I printed enlarged photos of the champagne glass from that day, the small packet my father had dropped into it, the lab results in bold, clear font. Alongside that, I prepared transcripts of their worst messages, word for word. The goal wasn't just to show the facts, it was to make everyone in that room feel the shift from admiration to disgust. I knew my parents would try to spin it as a misunderstanding the second I opened my mouth. So I invited a few plus ones of my own. A friend who happened to be a local journalist with a large online following. 2 university professors who had seen me push through my degree without a cent from my family. And an old neighbor who once saw my parents screaming at me in the driveway when I was 17. I didn't tell them exactly what I was about to do, only that it would be worth witnessing. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I made sure my parents thought I'd moved on.
I sent polite texts about what I'd wear.
I offered to bring dessert. I even complimented their invitations. The more they believed I was still under their thumb, the harder the fall would hit. By the time December 31st rolled around, my plan was airtight. The evidence was ready.
The witnesses were prepped. My speech was memoized down to the pauses. I wasn't just going to expose them.
I was going to strip away the one thing they valued more than money, their image. And I was going to do it with the same smile they'd always taught me to wear in public. The night of the gala, the air outside was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but inside the ballroom, everything was warm gold.
Chandeliers shimmered overhead. Crystal glasses caught the light like prisms.
A string quartet played near the corner, soft enough to keep the crowd's laughter and clinking silverware in the foreground. This was my parents' kingdom, and they were in their element. Richard in a perfectly tailored tux, laughing too loudly at some businessman's joke. Elaine in a deep emerald gown, gliding from group to group like she was born to command a room. I arrived deliberately late, knowing that would draw just enough eyes to me without being suspicious. My dress was sleek, black, and understated, but the confidence I carried into the room was anything but. On my arm was Maya, my journalist friend, who wore a small, knowing smile. Her phone was tucked in a small clutch, already set to record. The moment I stepped in, I saw the flicker of surprise in my parents' faces. Just a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by that polished, public smile. Elaine swept toward me, kissing my cheek. "Darling, you made it. You look presentable." It was a dig, disguised as a compliment. I didn't bite. For the first hour, I played along. I mingled. I let them think I was here as a dutiful daughter. Every now and then, I caught Richard watching me, as though he still suspected I might cause trouble. But each time, I was just chatting with someone, champagne flute in hand, the perfect image of civility. In reality, I hadn't taken a single sip. I didn't trust anything in this building that came from their hands. At 11:50 p.m., Richard took the stage to prepare for his annual toast, the one he used to congratulate family, friends, and the promising year ahead. People began to gather near the front, glasses refilled, smiles ready for the midnight cheer. That was my cue. I felt the weight of the manila envelope in my clutch, the evidence, the texts, the lab results. It wasn't heavy in pounds, but it was heavy in everything it represented. 4 years of survival. A lifetime of their manipulation. And the one night I'd finally take control. Maya gave my arm the slightest squeeze, like she could feel my pulse through my skin. I stepped toward the small stage, letting Richard's voice fade into the background. I could hear the muffled clink of silver against crystal as people quieted down, ready for the toast. But they weren't going to get his toast. They were going to get mine. I stepped up onto the stage just as Richard was lifting his glass. "Before my father starts," I said, my voice steady, "I'd like to say a few words of my own." A murmur swept through the crowd. People shifted, curious. Richard's smile froze for half a second, but he stepped aside, because what else could he do in front of so many witnesses? I took the microphone, my fingers loose, my breathing slow. "This year, I graduated with honors," I began, despite what some people told me was impossible. "I worked 2 jobs, I applied for every scholarship I could find, and I did it without a single cent of support from my parents." There was polite applause. My parents were still smiling, but I saw it, that flicker in Elaine's eyes. She knew this wasn't going where they wanted. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," I continued, "but there's something I've been carrying since that day. Something you should all know." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the first enlarged photo, the champagne glass from my graduation party, pale powder dissolving into gold bubbles. A ripple went through the crowd. "This was my drink that day," I said, holding it high so everyone could see. "I didn't touch it. And here's why." I handed the second photo to Maya, who walked it through the crowd. The lab results, in bold letters. Detected, high-dosage sedative. Gasps. Whispers. The quartet in the corner stopped playing. "My father put it there," I said plainly. "And my mother knew." Elaine let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "That's absurd." "Is it?" I cut in. "Because I also have years of text messages, voicemails, and witnesses to the abuse that's been going on since I was a child. And if anyone here wants proof, I'll be happy to send you the files tonight." I could see it happening, the shift in the crowd. People who had been smiling at my parents minutes ago were now stepping back, whispering to each other, eyes narrowing. "Some people toast to family," I said, setting the microphone back on the stand, "but I toast to freedom from them." I stepped off the stage. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need it. I had already won. Behind me, the room buzzed with the low, electric hum of scandal spreading. My parents stood frozen, their polished smiles gone, their perfect image shattering in real time. By morning, photos of the lab results were online, thanks to Maya. The local paper ran a headline, "Social elites accused of poisoning daughter at graduation." My parents' phones stopped ringing with party invitations and started ringing with questions from people they owed money to. Within months, they lost their country club membership, their business contracts, and eventually, their house. They never apologized. They never admitted anything. But it didn't matter. They'd been erased from the world they worshipped, and I was free. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's not a scream or a fight in the driveway. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and delivered at the exact moment when the people who hurt you think they're untouchable. That night, I didn't just expose them. I ended the story they'd been telling about me my entire life, that I was weak, dependent, nothing without them. Because I walked out of that ballroom not just as their daughter, but as the person who finally made them face the truth. If this story made your heart race or gave you that sweet, cold rush of justice, smash that like button. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen or pulled off yourself? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because here, justice is always served with a perfect twist.